Welcome into Black and Blue on this Monday, November 25th, 2013. I am your host, Jesse Gennigan, and I apologize for missing last Friday's show. A lot of stuff came up, but we're here on this Monday, and we're ready to talk a weird weekend in the NFC North, where two teams played each other, and still nobody in the division won. So what do we have on tap for today's show? We are going to talk, as I mentioned, about Bears-Rams. That was a weird game. Everything was just weird this weekend. Lions-Buccaneers. And we are going to have a preview because the game's on Thursday. We're going to talk about Lions and Packers on Thanksgiving on Turkey Day. And we will get into who's going to win that game. Will Aaron Rodgers play? I'm going to make a uneducated guess on that. But we start in Lambeau Field where see, this is already throwing me off. Where the Green Bay Packers and the Minnesota Vikings played to a 26-all tie. A draw, if you're a soccer fan. This is so weird. When I was thinking about the show last Friday, and I was thinking about how I would preview things, and then the show ended up not happening because I had some things come up, there was no part of me that ever thought I'd be sitting here on Monday talking about a tie football game. But that's where we are, and that's what happened. So let's get into this weird one, and in order to get into it, let's just start at the beginning. And we start with Scotty Football, y'all. Scotty Football, Scott Tolzien, with the opening touchdown for the Green Bay Packers, running to his right, pump faking, running back to his left, whoop, spin move, and into the end zone for Scott Tolzien, and boy, were the Packers off to a flying start, and was it going to be a great day for Scott Tolzien then? Not so much. The soaring highs and the crushing lows of being an NFL quarterback. Tolzien blows up Twitter with his spin move. Everyone's talking about him, and by the end of the third quarter, he's not even the Green Bay Packers quarterback anymore. Tolzien's day passing the football, 7 of 17, 98 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. The no interceptions is an improvement. Everything else, a bit of a regression. Tolzien said after the game that, quote, he would have replaced himself too, which is good. He understands. The Packers passing game for 3 quarters yesterday with Tolzien at the helm, just a completely stagnant unit at that moment. Nothing was moving. The Packers were stalling. You could see the energy being taken out of not just the offense, but the entire team. The inability to get anything going downfield was really sucking the life out of the team, the offense, the defense, the fans in the stadium. Everything was going south. But then, the skies opened up over Lambeau Field. The clouds parted. Sunshine pervaded through a seemingly dark world, and the universe's greatest quarterback jogged onto the field as savior for the green and gold masses. Hallelujah! That's right. Matt Flynn stepped onto the field for his first action in a Green Bay uniform once again. Flynn, 21 of 36, 216 yards, 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions, and he led the Green Bay Packers from 16 down all the way to overtime. And you could feel it when Flynn took the field. The fans noticed. The fans went nuts for Matt Flynn. And it just seemed like that at the moment was the perfect spark plug the Packers needed to get going offensively, to inspire their defense a little bit, and to just lift the otherwise blah feeling over this whole game from everyone involved in it. So, what do we do with the quarterback situation for the Green Bay Packers now? And how was it handled yesterday? I think it's really hard to argue that Mike McCarthy should have made that change any sooner than he did. I think any argument made right now that Flynn should have come in sooner or maybe even started that game is just based on the hindsight of knowing what happened. Because Tolzien, yes, he had thrown some interceptions coming into this game, 5 of them in the 2 games he played. But he showed a lot of potential, or I think Tolzien had shown throwing 5 interceptions in the 2 games he played. But he came in and he showed a lot of potential. Balls down the field, on the money, hitting those deep routes in earlier games. And it was really frustrating to see him not quite fulfill that potential. I started to compare him to Rex Grossman after a little while because when Tolzien would do something good, it was really, really good. See the touchdown run, see any number of deep passes he completed. But it started to seem like that's all he had in him. Like, there's a picture on the internet, and I can't quote it, but it's blanket, I'm going deep. And it's got a picture of Rex Grossman, because that was Rex Grossman. He would just go deep. That's what Tolzien turned into. It was either the ball was going 30 yards down the field, or it was going to be an incompletion. So no doubt some potential there from Scott Tolzien. A lot of it, because he's got a lot of the tools you like. He's got that arm strength. You know, they talked a lot about his preparation coming into the game, and it's a cliche to say he's the last guy out of the building every day, and all of that, because who knows, if that's really true. I mean, it's easy to sit there and tell who was the commentators yesterday, Kevin Burkhardt and John Lynch. It's easy to sit there during the week when they do their pregame interviews and tell them, yeah, Tolzien, he's the last guy out of here. I don't know if it's really true, but if it is, then you've got a guy who does the prep work, has a lot of the tools you'd need to be a successful quarterback. He just needs time to put it all together. And unfortunately for him, if the Packers are going to get to the postseason at the end of the year, they didn't have the luxury of time. They couldn't grow with Scott Tolzien. They had to win now or tie. So they bring in Flynn. They pull the trigger on that. Matt Flynn comes in and plays really well. And it was the right decision at the time, and it worked out. Is a tie the result you wanted coming out of the Vikings game? No, but it helps you, especially on a day where the other two teams ahead of you in the NFC North lose. It helps you. It gets you to within a half game of first, and we'll get way into the division later. But for Scott Tolzien, it's got to be disappointing because this was his chance to really come out against a bad Vikings team and finally put it all together and have that game where he doesn't turn the ball over a bunch and he goes a bit nuclear with the yardage like he did last week. Just didn't happen for him. The Vikings were ready for him, and outside of the one amazing touchdown run, and I cannot understate it enough, that was awesome. Tolzien really didn't have much for him yesterday, and with the season, you all day you assume that the Bears are going to find a way to beat the Rams and the Lions are going to find a way to beat the Buccaneers. So you assume those 2 wins, and then you think, okay, the season is kind of on the line here. McCarthy had to pull the trigger. He did. It worked out for him, worked out for Flynn. It's disappointing for Tolzien, but I think Tolzien showed enough potential to at least keep himself consistently employed for the next few years, which is a battle. If you're a guy who was on the practice squad earlier this year, a guy who was cut as the 3rd-string quarterback in San Francisco, it's a battle to find consistent employment, but someone will look at this tape and go, okay, we can fix the turnovers. And this guy's got all the tools everywhere else, it would seem. We will have more on this quarterback situation as it relates to Thursday, which is the real question in the Green Bay Packers season right now. And we'll get to that later when we preview that Lions-Packers game coming up on Thanksgiving. But we will move on now to a different part of the offense. Eddie Lacy yesterday was terrific. Lacy on the day, 25 carries, 110 yards, and a touchdown. That man is impossible to tackle a lot of the time. And by that, it takes 5 guys to bring him down a lot of the time. It's insane what a team needs to do to tackle him. He's just so determined. He's the kind of physical running back these Packers have not had since I've been watching him. And he's really making a difference for this offense. And it was really good to see him do this, to run this way in a game where they didn't have Aaron Rodgers. He did it against the Bears, but the Bears had been game planning for Rodgers all week, and were prepared for Rodgers all week. And now all of a sudden you've got to stop Eddie Lacy exclusively. It becomes an issue. And the Bears running defense is an invisible entity at this point, as we'll get to. Last week, what was it, like 17 carries, 24 yards or something? It was bad last week for Eddie Lacy. And you were starting to wonder if maybe he's been great all year, but is it because he's great or because of the threat of Aaron Rodgers with him? And undoubtedly the threat of Aaron Rodgers helps any running back. I can't deny that. But it was really nice to see Eddie Lacy in a game where Rodgers was out of sight, out of mind. You couldn't, he didn't factor into Minnesota's game plan at all. And he still went out there. He still put up over 100 yards. He ran the heck out of the football and just would refuse to go down at times unless there was like 4 or 5 guys gathered around him. So really, Eddie Lacy at times this year, a lot of the time, has looked like a bit of a superstar in the making, and that was a superstar performance from Eddie Lacy. Now, 110 yards isn't overwhelming, but it's the way he got them. It's the physical bruising nature of how he got them that really impresses you as you watch him, and he did get into the end zone. Just so nice to see him have this type of game when everyone knows that Eddie Lacy is going to be the guy that's fed the ball time in, time out in a football game. Defensively, though, for the Green Bay Packers, there are all sorts of issues that were not there a few weeks ago that have come up, and this team defensively right now is an absolute mess. Adrian Peterson on the day, and now Adrian Peterson will do this to you. There's no shame in giving up 146 to Adrian Peterson. He'll do that to good defenses. Peterson, 32 carries, 146 yards, and a touchdown. That happens. You play Adrian Peterson for 75 minutes, he's probably going to get to 150 yards. But the end of the game scenarios and in overtime when they had gone up a field goal, and Toby Gerhart's getting the football and getting 8 carries for 91 yards. For God's sake, someone on Green Bay, tackle someone. Now, I realize it's not that easy to bring down Adrian Peterson, and it's really not that easy to bring down Toby Gerhart either. He's a big dude. But the game was on the line. A game you had no business winning, but you were in overtime. Tackle somebody. And the big problem for me was that before Flynn came in and lit a fire under the offense and lit a fire under the fans and got this team going, boy, did it look like this defense had quit. Minnesota was just running the football right down their throats all game, and there was just no resistance. And Christian Ponder on the day, we've had our fun with Christian Ponder here. I once openly laughed at the idea of him giving the Vikings the best chance to win. And he comes into Lambeau Field, and the Green Bay Packers allow Christian Ponder to go 21 of 30 for 233 yards, a touchdown, and 0 interceptions. When Rodgers got hurt against Chicago, you could hang your hat at the time on this idea that the Green Bay Packers defense had been better. Had been enough to keep them in games even if they don't have Rodgers. The defense in this entire stretch has not held up their end of the bargain. They are getting gashed now, week in, week out, and it's starting to look a lot like the 2011 and 2012 versions of this defense, which weren't very effective at all. And it calls into question, and you're starting to see this in an increasing amount, it calls into question Dom Capers' leadership of this defense, and should he still be the guy with the title of defensive coordinator. Packers fans are seemingly increasingly fed up. You can just check the Twitter feed of Jason Wilde, the Packers beat writer at Jason J. Wilde, who has been arguing since maybe the second quarter yesterday about Dom Capers with fans who want him out. And I look at this defense and I look at how bad it's been for a few years now, and you just start trying to pinpoint things. You start wondering what's happening. One of the things I thought yesterday when I was thinking about this, is Capers' message growing stale? After time, and this doesn't seem to happen so much in the NFL, but in other sports, a message just grows stale after a little while, and you need someone to come in and sort of reinvigorate your team. So is Dom Capers' message growing stale with this defense? Is there even a message? I mean, Capers doesn't seem like the type of guy who will stand in front of a defense and, rah, rah, rah. And maybe that's the type of guy they need, a type of guy to get them motivated, but you would think they'd have Kevin Green for that. Or is Capers just hamstrung right now by the personnel he has? He has half a Clay Matthews. Matthews still playing with that cast on his hand. He was really good yesterday, but for most of the year he's had none or half of a Clay Matthews. No Nick Perry, who we mentioned has been fantastic this season. He's had MD Jennings, which is a detriment because MD Jennings is not a starting safety in the National Football League. He's had the ghost of Tramon Williams, who outside of that Giants game has been pretty bad so far this year. And he's missing Charles Woodson. And I don't know if Woodson had it so much towards the end of his Green Bay run. But Woodson was a leader on that defense, and he was a toy for Capers. Capers can move him around, move him into the slot, play him at linebacker, for God's sake. He was a guy that Capers could get real inventive with and move him all around the field. He didn't really have that now that Woodson's gone. Does that mean they should have kept Woodson? I don't really know. He certainly seems like he would fill a hole given the fact that MD Jennings is a terrible football player. But I'm not so sure that at the salary that he probably wanted, they should have kept him. That doesn't really change the fact, though, that he's gone, and it's something that Capers is missing. So is it time, maybe not now, obviously, you don't fire a guy on November 25th, but after this season, do you part ways with Dom Capers? Is it time to bring in a fresh voice to lead this Green Bay Packers defense? And I think it's starting to seem like it is. At the very least, this has to be a strong consideration for Mike McCarthy at the end of the offseason, or at the end of the season, because this isn't a new problem. This defense has been bad for about 3 years now. And it looked better at the beginning of this year, and there started to be this promise that they would be an improved unit, and they have been pass rushing wise. They've been getting to the quarterback more this year than it seems. But they're still having games where they just get gashed over and over again. And yesterday in the running game, it was again that story. And it starts to really wear thin as a fan of the team, watching a defense flail about like this on a week-in, week-out basis. And you just wonder, if you're a Packers fan, why should we have to put up with this for so long when it's been such a glaring problem for a few years now? And you can argue, as Jason Wilde does on his Twitter, that Capers isn't the problem, that it's a confluence of things, that, personnel is out. Maybe you don't have the right personnel in spots. Maybe it's a Thompson problem. Maybe it's a McCarthy problem. Maybe it's a Capers problem. Maybe it's all three combined. But you've got to do something now, because it keeps happening every year. And arguably at no time in Capers' time here as this organization needed this defense to step up more than it needs it to step up right now. And it's failing the task week in, week out. And the Packers aren't winning football games. And they're biding their time waiting for this franchise quarterback to get back and bail them out like he does so often. And really, this is underscoring the value of what Aaron Rodgers covers up on a week in, week out basis. So I just think after the season, if you're Mike McCarthy and you sit down and maybe you look at all the tape from this season, you start looking at you see the improvements in the early part of the season and you feel good about it. But once you get to this part of the season, once you get to this, that Bears game and beyond, you're really not going to like what you see. And it's at the worst possible time for this football team. And I think you got to consider bringing in a new voice to lead this defense and hope that can light a fire under it, because whatever you've been doing for the last 2 years, it just isn't working. There were 2 teams from the division in this game, though, and we do have to talk about both of them, even though one of them really isn't all that relevant to the division picture anymore. And the other one is, of course, the Minnesota Vikings. So what is their point of view in this game? What do you think the Vikings organization feels after they watch this game? And I think they loved what they saw yesterday. I think if I'm a Minnesota Viking and I'm coming in at, 2-8, I love that I just denied the Green Bay Packers a chance to take a share of first place on their home field. I love that. Now, would I like to win? Obviously, I'd like that more. But I think they walk away from this game going, can't have it that easy, guys. And more than that, I think they probably love that they just made the Packers play 75 minutes in a week where they have to play on Thursday in a huge division game. Because when you ask a Packers fan who their main rival is, most times you'll hear, other than when Brett Favre was in Minnesota, you'll hear Chicago. But the Packers are the Bears to the Vikings. And if they're not going to be any good this year, and they aren't, and they're out of it already, then playing spoiler for the Green Bay Packers is about as good. It is about as much fun as they can have for the rest of the year, and they did it effectively yesterday. They didn't give up the win. Obviously, as I said, they would have loved to have won, but I've got to think they are just thrilled with the idea that they made the Packers play 75 minutes, banged up before a very short week. The Vikings are spoilers now. That's what they are at 2-8-1 or whatever they are now. They did their job yesterday to perfection. Elsewhere in that game for them, they're learning about Christian Ponder more than I thought they would. I've sat here for weeks thinking you have to learn about Josh Freeman, and I still think you do. I still think you've got to learn what you have in Josh Freeman instead of having him inactive every week. But they are learning about Christian Ponder, and he is starting to, he'll have that Ponder type game, but he is starting to show signs of competence at that quarterback position and some improvement, and enough, you hope it's not enough to really fool them into just riding with him, because I don't think he's the answer, but I think he's starting to play well enough where he could trick them into thinking he's the answer. I don't know. I would think if they end up with a very high draft pick, which it looks like they will, that Ponder's days there are limited either way, because I would think that, they like what they've seen out of Ponder lately. They're smart enough to know, he's not the franchise guy at this point. So they could go out, they could get a Bridgewater, a Mariota, any of the, a Manziel, any of the other quarterbacks coming out this year in this sort of super class for quarterbacks. And just on a side note, as a Packers fan, the idea of having to play Marcus Mariota or Johnny Manziel twice a year terrifies the absolute heck out of me. So, hopefully they believe in Christian Ponder. I also think, though, they're learning about Cordero Patterson. I will be open and honest about this one. I've been harping on this for weeks now, that I wanted them to get Patterson more involved in the offense. And they really made a concerted effort to do that yesterday. And he dropped a game-winning touchdown in the end zone and dropped a very deep pass in overtime as well. Now, the pass to Patterson was deflected just a tiny bit by Devon House, but it hit him right in both hands. I mean, he's got to catch that football. Now, Patterson did have a big return, 57 yards. He made that play, but for the most part, looked like they were really trying to get him into the offense. And whenever the potential was there for Patterson to really make a big play, he botched it. So, good on them, I think, for getting him more involved in the offense. And it's a learning process for Cordero Patterson. And he has the potential, all the potential in the world to get there eventually. Yesterday was a rough day for him outside of the kick return. but I think he'll recover. Wrapping up with the Vikings, a tie is just such a weird result for both teams. Really, I would imagine. You heard a lot out of the Packers yesterday, a lot of disappointment about not winning this game. I would imagine the Vikings are okay with it. They get to play spoiler, and they get to play spoiler, and it doesn't hurt their draft stock as much. In a way, it's a perfect result for them, but I'd imagine they're fine with it. I'd imagine it stings a little bit to give up that 17 or 16 point lead to Matt Flynn. But overall, I'm sure the Vikings and their fans know nothing matters anymore this season. So to get to play spoiler in Green Bay a little bit, about as good as you could expect. Onward we go in the division in a week of sadness for everyone involved. We move to this game, I believe, we move to Detroit, where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers came in and picked up a 24-21 victory over the division-leading Detroit Lions. Oh, Lions. Lions. Come on now. We had this discussion after the Bears game when they won and they took a stranglehold in the division, and people looked at their schedule and went, "Ooh, it's pretty easy going down the stretch," And we talked about how they were in the driver's seat of the division, but we also talked about looking at that schedule and thinking to yourself, this is today's NFL. Every game left looked winnable, but there aren't really many terrible teams left. So if you don't play your game, you can lose a lot of them too. And in this stretch, the Lions are now 0-2. Lost to the Steelers last week, and lost to a suddenly resurgent Tampa Bay Buccaneers team this week, which looked like a sure win 2 weeks ago when we started talking about this stretch coming down to the end of the season for the Lions. So when you're the better team and you're at home and you're playing a 2-8 Tampa Bay Buccaneers team, how do you lose? Everyone, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Turnovers! Yes, turnovers. It's the quickest way, I think, in the NFL to sort of equalize a talent gap between two teams. If one is up here and one is down here, and I'm miming it even though you can't see it, but you can picture in your head what I'm doing. And all of a sudden the team way up here turns the ball over 5 times. Well, suddenly we're evening things out a bit, and we're giving the worst team a chance. And that's what happened yesterday. The Lions turned the ball over 5 times. Tampa Bay does not turn the ball over a single time. And so here we sit. The Lions are now 6-5, and we will get, as I mentioned earlier, to a bigger look at the division later. So who was the perpetrator? Who was the guy who committed most of the turnovers? It was their quarterback, Matt Stafford, 26 of 46, 297 yards, 3 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. No, Matthew. No. You have got to get games like this out of your system. Especially when you are coming down the stretch in a tight 3-team division race. You cannot do this anymore. We all know when we watch Matthew Stafford, when you watch a Detroit Lions game, we all know he has the potential to do things like this. And it's so maddening when you watch Matthew Stafford too, because you see some of the throws he makes, you see the arm strength, and you just think about how good he could really be. But a few times a year, he will do things like this, where he turns the ball over 4 times by himself, and it keeps him from realizing the potential that he has. And it's at a certain point, Matthew Stafford starts running out of potential talk. At a certain point, this is just who Stafford is, and you're going to have to live with it. And I think you can say that about... in fact, I'm pretty sure that is what Jay Cutler is at this point. Cutler's a guy who is really good a lot of the time, but he's got 4 or 5 turnover games in him, and you just live with it because that's who he is. That's all who he's always going to be. At a certain point, Stafford no longer has the potential to cut this out, and this is just who he is. And we're starting to get to that point. If the Detroit Lions are going to win this division, if they're going to come down the stretch, if they're going to win on Thursday in a big game, you can't do this. And as a Lions fan, when you come in and you have the better team, like you knew you had the better team coming in on Sunday, and Stafford hands them the ball 4 times, I don't know how you can even stand watching it. It's got to be it's got to make you so angry to see what Stafford is capable of, to see the throws he makes, to see the yardage numbers this guy puts up. And just think to yourself, what could he really be? What could this team be if he could cut the interception stuff out? Stafford threw 4 yesterday. Aaron Rodgers has played a bunch of games this year despite the injury. He has 4 all year. So if the Lions are going to get where they want to be at the end of the year, they've got to cut out the turnovers, and it starts with the quarterback position. And he can throw for all the yards he wants, and he normally does throw for all the yards he wants, and he threw for almost 300 yesterday. But if he's going to turn the ball over 4 times, if he's going to keep doing this every few games, they're going to be watching football at home in January, and that seems so absurd when you think about where they were 2 weeks ago, coming off a big win against the Bears, in control of the division with what looked like a cupcake of a schedule coming down the stretch. Now they go 0-2 in this stretch. They've got the Packers coming in on Thursday in a big game. And what was a really promising year, what looked like the Detroit Lions year to finally, they made the playoffs 2 years ago, but as a wild card, this looked like the year where the Lions really had a shot to come in and win this division. And they're still technically in first, but my goodness, it is not looking great in Detroit land right now. Megatron did Megatron things yesterday. 7 catches, 115 yards. What was nice to see if you're a Lions fan, though, was someone in that wide receiver core that wasn't named Calvin Johnson making plays. Of course, I'm talking about Nate Burleson, who finally returned after his pizza-related injury. Burleson on the day, 7 catches, 77 yards, and a touchdown, and they finally have a decent option not named Calvin Johnson. Chris Durham's had games here or there where he was decent. Burleson is a guy you could line up on the other side. You can count on as sort of a possession guy. Look for him on thirds. He's such a nice counterbalance to what you have with Calvin Johnson on the other side. And you would think he'd be sort of a security blanket for Stafford eventually. Now, Stafford had him yesterday and threw 4 picks. So who knows? But undoubtedly, Nate Burleson is a really nice piece to have back for this Detroit Lions offense. And a really nice guy to have on the other side of Calvin Johnson to maybe draw a little bit of attention, even though obviously defenses are still going to give a lion's share of the attention to Calvin Johnson. No pun intended. On the ground, a mixed bag for the Detroit Lions offense. Reggie Bush, 15 carries, 83 yards. Pretty decent. Joique Bell, 6 carries, 15 yards. Not very decent. So, was that 98 yards total rushing, most of them by Bush. It's not bad. You would think it'd be enough to at least make, open a few things up for Stafford. And it must have been, because Stafford did throw for 297 yards. But I see that 4 on my paper in the interceptions column. And it just, like, every time I look at it, it blinks at me. And I don't know. It's just, you can't have that, as I've said 20 or 30 times so far in this 5-minute segment so far. This is another game though where the Detroit Lions move the football and they don't score a ton with those yardages. We talked about this a few weeks ago, where the Lions had a massive game yardage wise and didn't score a ton of points. In this one, Stafford goes for almost 300, 297. The Lions rush for almost 198 yards. So nearly 400 yards of total offense. And they scored 21 points. Now, obviously, they did turn the ball over 5 times, and that doesn't help. So, you put up 400 yards, you've got to be getting more than 21 points out of it. Other side of the football, and this is where it continues to be frustrating if you're a Lions fan. It even frustrates me as a neutral. Because if the Packers aren't going to win the division, I'm rooting for the Lions. But obviously I need them to lose as a Packers fan. But when you look at the numbers, it's maddening to look at this game and go, they lost? And then you see the 5 turnovers and go, oh yeah, they did lose. But offensively for the Buccaneers, Mike Glennon is their quarterback, in case you didn't know. Obviously, Josh Freeman's in Minnesota rotting away. Glennon, 14 of 21, 247 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Taekwon Underwood, 3 catches, 108 yards, 2 touchdowns. Both of those numbers, though, are buoyed by Underwood's 85-yard touchdown catch. Glennon's day looks pretty nice. 14 of 21, 247, 2 touchdowns. But you take away the 185-yarder, and suddenly you're, 162 yards or something like that? Quick math on 13 of 20. You take away the 85-yarder, and Underwood's got 2 catches for 23 yards and 2 touchdowns. Vincent Jackson had 2 catches for 61 yards. Remember, Vincent Jackson's in Tampa Bay. Who knew? And this is another reason it's so frustrating, because the Bucs offense, they didn't do anything outside of one play. They didn't really do anything. And Detroit still lost. Taking sacks into account, the Buccaneers had 228 yards of total offense yesterday. 207 of that passing, 22 rushing yards. Some dude named Bobby Rainey carried the ball 18 times for 35 yards. They went 4 of 14 on 3rd down. And the Detroit Lions lost to this team. Granted, the Bucs have been up on the upswing lately. They've won 2 in a row. They came in feeling pretty decent about themselves after a terrible start. But with the way the Tampa Bay Buccaneers played on Sunday, Detroit had no business losing to this team at all. Yet they found a way to do it. And now the Detroit Lions are still in first place, good for them, but they're 6-5, and they are scuffling in a big way. And who knows who they'll have to face on Thursday. But that's going to be a huge game for this division for both teams now, because both teams are A, still in the division race, and B, are looking to stop a pretty significant slide. But the disappointment doesn't end there in this division. Oh, we called it the week of sadness for a reason. The St. Louis Rams hosted the Chicago Bears on Sunday, and the Rams win this game 42-21. Oh boy! Tavon Austin set the tone early with a ridiculous touchdown run. If you haven't seen what Tavon Austin did against the Chicago Bears on Sunday, go to YouTube right this second and find it, because it was insane. I'm going to try and do it with words. Austin takes a pitch, coming to his left. Everyone on the Rams looks like they're going left. They bring a offensive lineman or something pulling around the other side, and Austin just reverses field on a dime, and all of a sudden everyone's going to the left side of the field. Austin cuts back hard and comes running around the right side of the field. 65 yards later, it's a touchdown. That did no justice to it all. Just go watch it. And that really did set the tone because the Rams would take a 21-7 lead out of that quarter after the first, and the Bears they didn't have anything for them. They never really recovered. At one point, this game got to be 26-21, but the Bears were never able to get over the hump. Eventually, the Rams get a couple touchdowns to really make it look like they housed the Bears, but just another loss that, if the Bears are going to be the Rams aren't a bad team, but they've got a, tight division race and a chance to take control of the division yesterday. Obviously, they didn't know that at the time. Go in there and get that win. I mean, it is the Rams and they're not that bad, but they're not that good either. So go in there and get that win. They didn't, and they got doubled up, 42-21. Josh McCown takes his first loss as the starter, I believe, for the Chicago Bears. I'm not totally sure on that. But it wasn't Josh McCown's fault. McCown on the day yesterday, 36 of 47, 352 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. He continues to just be all the Bears could have hoped he'd be in that role and a whole bunch more. To the point now where you start to wonder, here's a guy who's putting up a ton of numbers. He's 2-1 as a starter. He's not turning the ball over, which is very important for the Bears. You start to wonder if they're ever going to bring Cutler back, because McCown's been every bit as good as Cutler throwing the football yardage-wise, and he's not turning it over. It's an absurd decision to make, and that's why I don't think there's any chance in heck they do it. But McCown has played himself into the conversation, and that is way more than I thought he'd do when Cutler went down with that injury a few weeks ago. But let's talk about the Bears' defense and what the Rams did to them. The Rams ran yesterday as a team for 258 yards. Let me repeat that loudly because yelling is fun. 258 yards! And this isn't your Rams from the past few years when Steven Jackson was one of the best running backs in the league and would go off on you. This 258 yards came from such esteemed running backs as Benny Cunningham, 13 carries for 109 yards and a touchdown. Zach Stacy, 12 carries for 87 yards and a touchdown. And as I mentioned up the top, Tavon Austin, 1 carry, 65 yards and a touchdown. You heard of any of those guys besides Austin? I didn't think you did. This Bears running defense right now is a dumpster fire. And it is a big problem for them. And it doesn't get any easier because, as we mentioned when talking about this defense for the last few weeks and how bad it's been versus the run, every team in the division now is well equipped to take advantage of that. All of that is not to mention that Sam Bradford was not the quarterback of the St. Louis Rams yesterday. It was Kellen Clemens. Kellen Clemens was the Rams quarterback yesterday. 10 of 22, 167 yards and a touchdown. They lost to Kellen Clemens. This was a terrible week for the supposedly good teams in this division. As I mentioned, the Rams aren't terrible. They had 4 wins, I believe, coming into this game. They're 4-6. But they beat the heck out of Chicago yesterday. And that is very, very, very concerning if you're a Bears fan. And now you've got, we'll talk about it in depth more next week, but you've got Minnesota coming in now with Adrian Peterson and Toby Gerhardt. How on God's green earth are they going to stop them? So with that, we look back on Sunday, November 24th, 2013, which I am dubbing the Sunday where nobody should have won. Or the Sunday
The Sunday where nobody that should have won actually did. It's a long name. They'll probably name the movie about it something different. So where in the heck are we now? As we will do every week now as we start to come down to it in this division. Maybe that's what I'll name the segment. So where in the heck are we now? Because on a week-to-week basis in this division, who knows? It's a coin flip right now between any of three teams. And it's just, at this point, pick your poison. First place remains the Detroit Lions despite the loss to Tampa Bay. They are 6-5. Their remaining schedule, Thursday against Green Bay, long week to prepare at Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York Giants, at the Minnesota Vikings. Now, if the good Lions team shows up, and say the Packers don't have Aaron Rodgers, they could win all of those games. If the bad Lions team continues to show up, they could just as easily lose all of those games, including at Minnesota. So who knows? A couple weeks ago, I was sitting here lauding the Lions. They were in control of the division. They had taken first place. They had beaten the Bears twice this season. Good for them. They looked good. They looked like, they were the healthy team in the division. They were ready to run away with it. Now, who the heck knows? In second place is the 6-5 Chicago Bears. The Bears, as I mentioned, will go to Minnesota this week. That run defense is going to get to deal with Adrian Peterson. They're going to get to deal with Toby Gerhardt. And if the Vikings don't have some design runs for Cordero Patterson design for them, I'd be really surprised. So that's not a cakewalk. Playing Dallas is not a cakewalk. The Cleveland Browns somehow is not a cakewalk normally. They'll go to Philadelphia. They got Green Bay. The Bears right now seem like a less... they seem like more of a known quantity, I suppose, than the Detroit Lions. They seem like I can count on them to go into Cleveland and get that win. They seem like I can count on them to probably find a way to beat the Vikings, but I don't know. With this run defense, giving up running yards to Benny Cunningham, I don't know. Let's look at the running backs they have to face yet. Adrian Peterson, DeMarco Murray, who knows how he shows up. I don't even know who runs the ball for Cleveland. Is it still Willis McGahee? But then LaShawn McCoy and Eddie Lacy. If they don't fix this running defense, they're going to get beat probably 4 out of the 5. And sitting in third place is the 5-1 Green Bay Packers, who will travel to Detroit for Thanksgiving. They've got Atlanta coming in what is now a noon game on that Sunday. That used to be a Sunday night football game. If you were not aware, that has been flexed out of Sunday night. That'll be a noon game that Sunday. In its place on that Sunday night will be the much superior New Orleans Saints, Carolina Panthers game as they battle for the NFC North or NFC South division supremacy, I guess, because I think they played twice, so nobody can really win the division that day. But at Detroit, Atlanta, then they go to Dallas, Pittsburgh, at Chicago. And so much in this division depends on Aaron Rodgers. Because if Rodgers comes back for this Thanksgiving game and he looks like Aaron Rodgers and he doesn't get himself hurt again and they can go forward with their guy, don't they seem like the best of a bad lot? I know I'm a Packers fan, but don't they seem like, if I'm betting between the Lions, who seem heck bent on blowing games to teams they shouldn't lose to, or the Bears, who are giving up 1 billion running yards a game, or the Packers with a newly healthy Aaron Rodgers and with Eddie Lacy and all that their offense can do, Packers with Rodgers seems like they'd be the logical choice. So much depends on him. If he doesn't play on Sunday or on Thursday, it's huge, and it could swing this division one way or the other for another team. So we'll see. The Packers with Rodgers, I think, are the front runners. Without him, I don't know. Someone's got to win it by default, but who knows? That leaves us with Thursday's game, and we have 9 minutes to talk about it, and some players of the week if we run a little bit short. And we will move to Detroit now, where the Packers will go visit the Lions on Turkey Day. And the big question going into that one will be, who is the quarterback for the Green Bay Packers? Matt Flynn yesterday clearly earned it. If Rodgers isn't going to play, it's Matt Flynn's show. But it is entirely possible that Aaron Rodgers plays in this football game. McCarthy yesterday, after the game against the Vikings, said, I believe the quote was he had no idea if Rodgers would play or not. It'll be big to see whether or not he practices this week. If he doesn't practice at all this week, he won't play. So we'll see if they start getting him out there. Maybe tomorrow, maybe Tuesday. And if he does start practicing earlier in the week, it looks like it would be a good sign. So we'll see. And this is the biggest game so far this season. The Packers could take first place all to their lonesome, at least for a little while. You know, the Bears are going to play on Sunday. But they can move into first place all by themselves. Well, actually, the Bears would technically still be in first, wouldn't they? Yeah. So I don't know what I'm talking about. But they can move ahead of the Lions with a win on Thursday. So this is the biggest game so far. And because it's the biggest game so far, and because the Packers are desperate right now, I think Rodgers is going to play. I've said it since he hurt himself. I thought he would push himself and get back for this Thanksgiving game. I just don't see them playing it without him. How effective would he be in that game? I don't know. Who really knows? Does anyone know? If you know, tweet the show at BlackBlueRAQ. But what I do know is that Aaron Rodgers doesn't have any pain throwing a football right now. He hasn't for a little while, but it's all about waiting for that bone to heal because you don't want it to... I think the word was displace, and displacing a collarbone does not sound like pleasant business. But I do know that Rodgers running around won't happen, and he's a mobile quarterback sometimes, and mobility is a big part of Rodgers' game. He won't be doing that if he plays on Thursday, so it'll be interesting to see how he plays. Still, I'll take 3/4 of Aaron Rodgers over most quarterbacks. Rodgers on the season before he got hurt, 168 of 251, 66.9%. 2,218 yards, 15 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Green Bay Packers quarterbacks combined since the Rodgers injury. 92 of 150, 61.3%. 1,074 yards. None of this sounds too terrible so far until we get to 2 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. There will be the difference. So I think Rodgers plays, but what if he doesn't? What if Rodgers is still standing on the sidelines with that sweet mustache on Thursday? What happens then? Well, Flynn was, he was pretty darn good on Sunday. And 4 days of prep work as the starter can only really help him. So, I don't think we'd get 6 touchdowns against the Lions, Flynn, that we had a few years ago. But I think he'd be pretty good, and I think he'd be the best... I think it'd be the best quarterbacking performance so far from any of these backups if Flynn is forced into duty on Thursday and is the guy. Of course, the scuffling Lions have lost 2 in a row, and they have to wonder themselves which quarterback's going to show up. And by that I mean, do you get good Stafford or bad Stafford? On the year, Stafford 274 of 465, 58.9%, which is not where you'd like that. 3,495 yards. Man, he throws for a lot of yards. 24 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. In 2012, Matthew Stafford, who was not very careful with the football, he's starting to creep back in a little bit, and they've got to find a way to fix that. Or as I mentioned earlier, they're going to be watching football at home in January. Obviously, these two teams played once earlier this year, and the Lions, I believe, in that game only put up, 9 points. They didn't have Megatron in that game. And bringing a guy who has 66 catches on the year for 1,198 yards and 11 touchdowns, that can only help you. So that's a weapon they didn't have. The Packers might not have Rodgers. I don't know. So what happens on Thursday? Where are we going with our prediction in this football game? And I look at this defense, and I think, for the Packers, and I looked at, Ponder picked them apart a little bit on Sunday for the Vikings. Stafford is much, much better than Christian Ponder when he's on. But when Stafford's off, he's going to be throwing it to the other team. And the Packers this year have a weird habit of they don't catch interceptions anymore. This used to be one of the best teams in the league at getting turnovers. They don't do it anymore. So you wonder if these Packers defensive backs are ready and will they make the plays when Stafford allows them to. Shot in the dark, as I mentioned, I think Rodgers plays in this game, and I think Rodgers plays well. And I think Eddie Lacy helps to take some of the pressure off. Eddie Lacy on the year, 197 carries, 806 yards, 4.1 per carry, 6 touchdowns. I think it's going to be a lot of Lacy's show, but I think Rodgers is going to be there on the field, and I think he's going to play pretty decent football. And I think the Packers rebound and take this. I think they finally get out of this funk they're in and get a win. Call it 35-28 on Thursday, Green Bay Packers. But let's do the alternate history. What if Matt Flynn is the guy playing for them? What if Matt Flynn is the starting quarterback for the Green Bay Packers on Thursday? I still think they're going to win. But by less, and I think each team will score less. If Flynn is the starter on Thursday, Packers 28, Lions 24 is where I'm going with that. I think the Packers get a little more deliberate in what they're trying to do with the football. A little more ball control, a lot more Lacy. Less possessions all around. But I think the Packers still find a way to pull that football game out, even if Matt Flynn is the starting quarterback. Obviously that, it's sketchy either way. The Lions are plenty capable of winning. We'll run through our players of the week now in this last 2 minutes. And players of the week in a week where nobody won is pretty difficult. We will give our offensive player of the week to Matt Flynn, 21 of 36, 218 yards, a touchdown, 0 interceptions. He led his team back from 16 down to get a tie. Adrian Peterson was great. He gets an honorable mention, 32 carries, 146 yards. Josh McCown was great. But what Matt Flynn did for this team and being the spark plug he was really helped. Defensively, Clay Matthews had 2 sacks. He gets the defensive award. Honorable mention to Ezekiel Ansah, who had 2 sacks as well. And now that I've rushed through that, we are out of time here as we have just 1 minute left. We want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving. We won't be here on Friday for you. We'll be eating leftover turkey. Monday, we will have many, many recaps. So stay tuned and tune in for that show on Monday. Have a good night, and we will see you then.